One of the really great things about having a YouTube channel has been the people that I have quote unquote met online. And one of those people is a fellow YouTuber who has the original Grognard channel, Devin. And he and I corresponded because coincidentally we were doing the same war game a few months ago, Wolfpack, and we began a communication surrounding that and extended to some other things. And during the course of that conversation, he asked me if I was familiar with this game, Dungeoneer, and he told me that based on my channel and our conversation that I would really like it. I was not familiar with it, and he was right. I do really like it, and I like it so much that I've spent a bunch of time playing it now and have come up with my solo system for playing the game. I should say this is a two-player game, but there are within the rules, the original rules, there is a solo system. I felt that the solo rules included, which I will not be discussing here, take a little bit of life out of the game because they strip it of one of its best features, I think, that we'll get to. So I have a very simple way of playing solo. In essence, you are choosing your own character and you're choosing your own opponent to crawl through the dungeon with. It is a dungeon that is made up of cards that you can pull and place, and they have various effects in the room depending on what it is. And you are also going to be attempting to fulfill certain quests, and based on who fulfills those quests first is whoever wins the game. By removing just a few cards from the deck, you can, in effect, play against a character that becomes the AI, and you can execute their turn to the best of their ability to hinder your actions. But I have removed any of the cards from the deck that specify, for example, when this is played, an automatic the other player automatically something negative happens to, because that becomes too difficult for me to manage. Well, how am I if I know I have this card in this hand, I'm not going to place my character in the position for that card to be used, and then the whole thing in effect becomes meaningless. So by just removing a few of those cards and a few other house rules, you can play this game very effectively as a card-based dungeon crawl. It plays a little long. I guess that's one of my knocks on the game, aside from the rules that are overly complicated. It does play a teeny bit long for what it is, but well, it's a dungeon crawl, so you need characters and you need quests. For this demonstration game, I'm going to be playing Shara Quickblade. She's an elf assassin, and she has some unfortunate art there, I must say. I like her because her special ability here, Assassinate, she gets to pay one of something called Glory to add one strength to her attack, and she can inflict an additional wound if she's successful. She can do that once per turn. So I like the impact of this choice because these Glory points, as we'll talk about, are part of the game's currency to gain you benefits in the game. So it's always a choice about what you're going to be using that for. She's going to be facing or attempting to defeat the Darkling Rogue, Tannen Shadefoot. And Tannen Shadefoot's special ability is Quicken, and on this character's turn, they may pay 2 of the Glory to get an additional movement a turn, and movement is basically actions that you can take during the turn, and this character can do this once per turn as well. Both characters that I'm using here start out with 6 life, and they have limits here to what type of cards that they can play. These are benefit cards that we will discuss later. So they have a different benefit type of card. So this fellow can play up to 3 of the yellow ones and 2 of the blue ones, and my character can play, it's actually the other way around, 2 yellow and 3 blue. Everybody starts out at level 1, and you will raise a level as you complete some quests. We'll talk about the quests in a minute. And everybody has stats for different types of abilities. The icon with the fist here is a basic attack strength. The sort of purple circle magic thing is basically magic ability, and neither of my characters are starting out with much magic ability or really get much magic ability. And as I mentioned, the foot or the boot in the blue represents a movement ability, which is also the number of actions that they get. And in this case, they're also both starting out with 2. In fact, they're both starting out with similar abilities, 1, 0, and 2, similar values, I should say, for the first level. Not all all the characters have that, and I found over the course of my play that starting out with characters of similar value somehow makes it easier. I'm not quite sure why. As you go up in levels, the values will change and also not remain the same in terms of they will turn into sort of different characters with different strengths that they have. Each deck, I'm playing with two combined decks here that work well together, and I'll talk about the reasons why. It's mostly because, well, I bought them because I liked the game so much, but I like the fact that you have more and more choices of cards to pull into your hand the more you integrate. There are many Dungeoneer games, and you should be aware that they do not typically integrate well together. The two that I'm using do integrate very well, but the rest of them do not, because you're playing different level dungeons, and you can't go into, say, higher level dungeon with a lower level character, because you would be decimated, basically. And if you think about this from the D&D perspective, you could see why it would be like going to a level 4 adventure with a level 1 character. It just wouldn't work. And this game, for better or worse, models that. So beware when you are buying these packs that they are not necessarily expansions in the sense of just putting all the cards together. The two, as I said, that I'm playing with work together, but not all of them do. Now, of course, it's a dungeon crawl, so there are quests. In the game that I play, I am getting 3 quests per character, and then there are 2 quests that are played to the table that either character can attempt to do. The game does come with many cards with many quests. These are the purple-backed cards, and the quests are of different sorts. And the sorts that I prefer and the sorts that I've chosen here are what are known as the escort, or this is the effect escort quest, meaning in the case of this quest, you need to travel from the dark altar to the vault entryway and sort of do something while you're traveling. And often there is a negative condition that affects you while you are in the context of fulfilling that quest. And so I've chosen here a princess rescue and freeing Cadman's soul here, which is another escort quest from the crypt to the tomb threshold. And then I've chosen one which is a basic slay quest. I need to get to the library and defeat this familiar in the library. For the opposition, I've also chosen 2 escort quests, and I've chosen a slay quest. So I've tried to keep these somewhat similar. You can see here, for example, that both of these quests, the Burn the Dark Tome and the Rescue the Princess Penelope, these originate in the same room, in the Dark Altar room. So once that card is pulled, both of these characters are going to be making their way to that room if indeed they want to fulfill that quest, and that adds a little level of tension potentially to the game. What can happen, however, is that the rooms are randomly pulled from these cards, the white-backed cards or the tan-backed cards. You can be stuck. For example, if you're waiting to fulfill a quest in the library and the library card never comes up or is at the very bottom of the deck, you can be stuck and just unable to fulfill it. There are quests that are also played to the table. And in this case, I'm playing 2 to the table. One is to go to the crypt and basically defeat Vladimir, impale Vladimir and slay him and the crypt. And the other is to go to this flooded chamber and then to overcome a threat level there, which we could talk about what that means when we get into the demonstration of the gameplay. So you have either character has the option of doing these quests. When I'm playing something solo, I like to give myself as much chance to experience the game mechanics and the game cards as possible, and this does not follow the rules in terms of how many are out, but for me, over the plays that I've had, I think this works pretty well. To win the game, you need to fulfill 3 quests of any combination, so any of your 3, or in this case you could do 2 from the table and 1 yourself, and each time you fulfill a quest, typically, I guess in this game actually for mostly all of these, although not the Sunken Treasure, you will advance 1 level and your stats will improve. So very typical dungeon crawl type of trope and mechanic there. The last thing to talk about here in terms of the overall game are the different types of cards that there are. You could see here in the upper left this thumbs up green number 3 or value of 3, this represents glory, and you are going to be able to or need to pay to use this card, which is going to be a benefit to you and against your opponent, with a certain number of glory points. One of the ways that you get glory points is by entering rooms. So if you successfully entered this room, for example, you would move your glory marker up 2, and then you can spend those points as you wish. This other icon here, this is also a boon, and we saw on the character card there is a limit to the number of these you can hold in your hand when you play them to the table. So if your character could only hold 2 of these, for example, if you played this is a permanent benefit for you in combat maneuver, that would take up one of your slots. And if you wanted to switch it out, you would need to use, and I believe it's using an action to do that. I'd have to, I'm not totally sure about that, I don't remember. The skull, the red here, this represents peril, and you also get peril points for entering rooms. So if you were entering the Throne of Tyranny successfully here, you would have gained 3 peril points that you could use to play, for example, this instant card, which is a trap against your opponent. And finally, the other type of benefit card is represented by this treasure chest, and this is called indeed a treasure card, and you have typically 2 different values for how many of the treasure or boons you can have out in your hand at any given time. And again, this is also paid for with these glory points that you get from exploring the dungeon and making your way successfully through the various rooms. There are just a few more things you're going to want to do before getting ready to play. The first thing is to remove the few cards that are, as I mentioned, specifically targeted to the opponent. So for example, this particular card, if you are to use it, it takes away a benefit, a treasure card from the opposition. I take this card out because, again, I can't go back and forth knowing, well, I have this on my hand, so I'm going to play it and lose something. It just doesn't make any sense. There's another card here that prevents a different effect of a boon, also same kind of card I take out, and there is another one like that. I think these are the only few. There are some cards that typically would be directed against your opponent that when I play that I need to direct against myself or use for myself. So for example, there might be a card that says to take an occupied dungeon tile and a dungeon card and move it somewhere. You, in a 2-player game, could potentially use that to your opponent's detriment, but the way I play this game, when there is that type of reference, I say that it is only to the character who has the card. The next thing to do is to create your deck of dungeon cards that you're going to be pulling. Now, if you're playing only with one of the pre-made decks of cards, you just pull what's there. Since I've combined 2, what I need to do is 2 things. I need to first of all make sure that every room that I need to fulfill a quest is in the deck that I pull. So I need to make sure I pull the Outer Sanctum, the Library, the Crypt, etc. into my deck. And the second thing I need to do is make sure that I'm not making the deck too large. When you buy one of these games, they come with 22 Dungeoneer cards that are making up the dungeon itself. That is a pretty decent number. If you go too far beyond that, I think I've probably got like 25 in here. If you go too far beyond that, the game gets way too long. As I mentioned earlier, it's already a long game, and the dungeon itself there's just far too many places to travel to try to get somewhere, and it gets a little bit boring. If you go below that, it gets too tight and you don't have enough places to move around in areas. Well, here's a good example where basically nothing happens and you can just accumulate the peril and the glory points without having to deal with some room effects. You kind of need that to get those values high enough so that you can play the cards in your hand. The one card we didn't take a look at closely yet are the monster cards that can get pulled in. And here's an example of one, this little bugbear guy. This costs, to bring this into play, this is going to cost 3 peril, and he has a health of 1. You can see here his effect If defeated, he inflicts one wound, one of this type of wound, on all heroes in the same space. So if you are in the room where this guy is deployed, you will take that impact as well. And he has a strength of 2. We'll get into how this works. It's pretty simple dice rolling, and this is an addition to your die number. A magic strength of 0, and he has a movement of 1. Now, in the way that I play this game, and we'll see this when we look mid-game in a bit, when these monsters are deployed, they are deployed to the dungeon itself under the control of whichever player has deployed them. And thereafter, they, in effect, become wandering monsters in the dungeon. If you want to have them act again against your opponent, it costs this number to bring them out under your control. So it's going to cost 3 peril to get this guy out and attack your opponent. But after he does that, if he isn't defeated, well, he's only got a health of 1, so he might only get 1 attack in there. But if he isn't defeated, he remains in the dungeon. And you can, because he is under your control during your turn, again, these are totally my rules, this is not as written, you can use this movement point to have him move through the dungeon. In this case, he could move to one room and, in effect, re-attack somebody if you redeploy him. So this is how I use the movement point value for the monsters in the game that I play. The game comes with cards that depict all the symbols that are on all of the cards in the game, and this is really handy. The other thing it comes with are trackers for your glory and your peril points, and each character will keep track of what they have, because as you, again, these are the currency in the game to deploy your cards. The game starts by pulling the Tomb Threshold card. This is the entryway to your tomb here, and it says you may not initiate a challenge on a hero here, meaning you can't deploy any monster against them. And it also says you may pay 2 glory to discard one of your personal quests and draw a new one. I don't really play with this rule because I'm not really picking the quests at random, but if you were picking them at random, that would be useful. Because you're starting here, you're gaining immediately, you're beginning with 1 peril point and 1 glory point, and you can see these are the entrances and exits to the Tomb Threshold, and they are represented here just by the door symbol, an open door symbol, I should say. And again, for any references for what the symbology is, you have this card here. So this is an open door. You pull in and place 4 cards at the beginning of the game. So we have a laboratory here that has a locked door, and you can see this symbol here, L plus or 6 plus with your foot. This means you have to overcome that number in order to enter the lab, and actually it's different for each door. So this is L5, L6, T5, and T6. Now what is T? I see. So we have locked doors here and we have traps here. And the difference is the locked door, and I had to refer back here because I forgot. The locked door, if you fail, you're going to lose 1 movement, which means in effect 1 action for the turn. And if you fail on a trap door, you will gain a wound. So there's little different effects here. And we simply place these around as we pull them. We have a flooded chamber. I think this is actually one of our quest rooms that we needed to get to, and this is where you can sort of see how the real randomness of this game creeps in, and maybe to the distaste of some people, because, for example, this is a quest to the table and it needs to happen in the flooded chamber. So right away, regardless of where this is placed, it's going to be pretty close by. Now, you can see here, I can't actually place that the way I indicated because this is a wall right here. So I need to place this here by, look at this here. So we have access, and we have the barracks here. And again, there's a wall here. I think this might have been also one of our needed quest places, and here is a junction. So this is how we start out. We have options as where to go, and I will set up with the tokens for the players and we'll get going. I should say that the game comes only with cards. It does not come with any tokens, and you will need to find your own tokens to keep track of where you are and which monsters you are controlling, etc. This is what everything looks like when we're set up to go. I try to keep everything to a similar color palette. So I've got the D6s here are what you're going to be rolling in combat. I'm basically doing, they are orange and I am sort of bluish green. I'm using the other D6 here to represent my health at 6. This is movement, and I've got it here. Unfortunately, I only have a D8 for the green, but D10 and D8 asymmetrical, but this at least represents more movement to me, so I know what I'm doing here. I have my peril and glory marked starting at 1 each because we're starting in the tomb threshold, and that's the resources we get. We have some additional counters here that we're going to place on monsters when we deploy them in the dungeon, and here we are represented by these eraser. Now I should point out the game actually does come with cards that have little depictions of the characters on them that you're meant to cut out and use as little standees. I haven't done that. Something in me doesn't want me to cut a card, even though it's meant to be done, so I'm going with the eraser look here. Obviously you could get something much more thematic, and that's basically it. We're ready to go. So what we do in the version of the game that I'm playing is we're going to be drawing a total of 7 cards into our hand, and we are going to be cycling down to 5 cards. Now, the reason that I do this is not the official rules, is because I want to be able to use and get through and see as many of the card options as I have. Again, this is something that may be distasteful to people who want to follow the rules more, but from my perspective, I have the game, I have the cards, I want to be given options and choices, because for me that's the most fun I have in gaming, is just trying to make game-related decisions. So I'm going to be drawing for each side. I'm going to be drawing 7 cards, and then we'll take a look at the hand that we get and assess what we're going to do. Alright, so here we're drawing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We'll just take a look at these cards as the hand of who I am playing. The first thing that you're going to do, much like, say, a game of rummy or whatever, is to sort your cards through to match up the cards that you would need to pay for using your glory and the cards that you would need to pay for using your peril. Now, in the case of this game and the turn sequence, the first part of the game would be to deploy any of your peril cards. So I tend to put these up here in front. Now, you can see we are coming in with 1 peril, and we have some high cost cards. These are some good cards. We've got a Dungeon Lord Ghoul here. We have a monster dragon, and we've got a fiend. So I've got an undead, a dragon, and a fiend. They are pretty strong monsters here with 2 health. I say pretty strong because many in the game just have 1 health. And we're definitely going to want to be able to use these against our opponent, but we certainly can't afford to do so now. And therefore, in the first section of the first part of the turn, we would not be able to do anything. Just quickly go over the turn order. Don't exactly play. This is the turn summary card. And this was called the Dungeon Lord phase. There's nothing to reset. This is the first turn of the game. The Dungeon Lord phase is when you are acting as the Dungeon Lord and deploying the monsters in the dungeon against your opponent. And then you move into what they call the build and hero phase, where you can, the build phase is where you can place cards in your own inventory for later use or for immediate use. And then your hero phase is when you can use various actions to move, explore, or attempt a quest. Now I should say in the build, what they're calling the build phase, you are counting that as an action too. So were I to, again, I have no 1 cost cards here, so right now before I move there's really nothing that I can do. But I can move, and we see here we are. I am the green. I can move in any number of places here and gain, when I do, some peril and glory points that I could then use to deploy cards. So part of what I would want to assess is what card in my hand. I've got 2 action points here. So in a turn, I could potentially move and deploy a card. The question is whether I want to deploy a card that's to my benefit or possibly get out one of these monsters. If I moved into the barracks, for example, I would get 4 peril and 3 glory. I should say also, if you know this game, you'll know that I am not playing with the actual rules for the use of the peril, but in the way that I play this solo, peril is good for you and glory is good for you. Peril is good for you because you can use it to deploy monsters against your opponent, and glory is good as per the regular rules because you can deploy your treasure and boon cards. So a choice would be, for example, for me to move into the barracks as 1 action. If I did do that, what I would immediately do would be to give myself 4 peril points, 1, 2, 3, 4, for a total of 5, and 3 glory points for a total of 4. So that would have been my 1 action. Then I could look through my hand here and notice I could actually play, for example, a ghoul. I could play this iron golem. Now, in the case of this game, because the Dungeoneer phase has already passed, by playing this card, I would simply be placing it in the room under my control, and so I would, if I were to do that, I would indicate that with a counter, and I can't place it in the tomb threshold, which is where my opponent is. So I would place it there for later use, and per the rules that I have, as I mentioned, this monster, I think thematically it makes sense to continue wandering around the dungeon, and I could redeploy or move him to follow my opponent. Now, because this is the first turn of the game, it doesn't really make sense to do that because I'm just wasting and sort of recosting myself to place this thing twice. So a better option with my 4 glory points would be to consider placing 1 of these cards. Now, of course, I realize here I needed to discard down to 5 cards before I did this turn. So let me do that and come back. The cards that I've decided to discard prior to the start of this turn are, I'm going to discard this Merc Dragon simply because it's a 5 peril monster and it's early in the game. I would end up hanging on to this for a while, even though it's pretty strong. I don't really need this right now, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm also going to get rid of this Repel Undead. Now, this is a card I have kept in the game because it does have an effect. Your hero has +1 magic this turn. It has an effect that I could use. The second effect of this card, where the targeting undead is discarded, that is a little harder for me to use in my solo play because, again, you know, I'm the one who's potentially or not potentially, I am the one who is deploying the monster against me, in effect. So, you know, if my opponent had an undead and I knew I had this card, you know, it kind of doesn't make sense. So when I play this game, even though I keep this card in because it does have an effect I can use, I sort of disregard the potential for this. So I don't really need a +1 magic, and in any event, I have another one that just has that. That's a permanent spell. So I'm getting rid of this instant also. So back to my hand size of 5, I am going to focus on utilizing for my second and last action of this turn one of my positive cards, and I'm going to play this. I'm going to definitely play this. This is a weapon, and basically what it does is it adds to an attack value. So in addition to the actual attack combat that happens, which we'll show at some point, they also have to overcome this threat +5 or take an additional wound. So this is a great weapon to have in your hand, and I will deploy that by placing it here, I'm not really very well organized space-wise, but placing it here, it costs 3, so I need to go down to 1, and that is the end of my turn. I do need to remind you and to note for myself that per my character, I'm only allowed 2 treasures at a time. This would be one of them. So this is taking up half my space, and if I get tired of it, I can switch it out for an action. But right now I have to remember I only have the option of having 1 more treasure to play. So that is the end of my turn, and that brings us to, let's see, what we're going to be doing. We now have our 4 cards left in our hand, so what we're going to do per the rules that I'm playing with is we will draw up to a total of 7 cards, and we'll take a look at them, we'll discard 2, and we'll end at 5 for the turn. I'll do that off camera. In the meantime, we're drawing our 7 cards for our opponent. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now she is, or he, I don't know, that's somewhat ambiguous, is also starting out with 1 and 1. And the first thing we need to do is to see what they may discard down to 5 before they start their turn. We've got a dimensional snare here where it is a trap and it inflicts a wound and it also relocates somebody. That's pretty good. We have a demon worm. Some attack cards. I think I am going to get rid of this just because we're early in the game. There's not a lot of places to relocate to, so that's one I'm going to discard. And then I think we're getting some extra magic here. This is great. A helmet, you can discard this to ignore a wound. And let's see, I think I will go here. This is something that allows you to get, I think there's a typo here, to retreat any exit. Oh no, to treat any exit, I see. Including walls is open. Oh, that's pretty good. I think I'm going to get rid of this. Holier Lantern. This will give a benefit to, or a detriment to me in terms of putting monsters out, but a detriment to my opponent also to play monsters against me. Again, this is a card you can use playing solo, but it's a little not so solo friendly, so I'm going to discard that one too. So this is my hand, and again, I can actually afford this iron helmet right away without moving because it only costs 1. That's a pretty good card to do. I think what I will do, in fact, is I had forgotten that this flooded chamber is one of our quests, and it showed up right away. So what I'm going to do is consider moving to the flooded chamber at the risk of taking a wound, and also at the benefit of being able to try to fulfill this quest here, which is right at this flooded chamber where I need to overcome another threat. At least I can show you how this works. And I think I am going to actually do that. Now, I'm going to do that before I deploy this helmet, because in this case I would have to add something to the threat for each ready treasure I have, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to move here, and I will, in doing so, give myself 3 glory and 4 peril for coming into this upsetting room of the flooded chamber, and indeed it is going to be perilous for me. So what I need to do is to overcome a threat 5 or plus, and well, unfortunately, I ran out of battery without realizing it, so while I did do all this on camera, so I thought it didn't actually happen. Point is, I did not successfully overcome this threat, so I only rolled a 2, which gave me a 4. I could not overcome this threat, and I got a wound. So that is the risk that this character took in attempting to fulfill this quest right now. And I say, just to point out, in this particular quest, the benefit is not moving up a level, but it is to gain 2 foot or movement points, which are gaining 2 actions per turn. So that's a pretty good benefit to have early on in the game, but now we have taken a wound instead. So this is where we are, and that was our turn because we only have 2 actions or 2 movement points. So to end the turn here, this character would need to discard down to, well, they are actually at 5 because they didn't use anything. So they get to pull in 2 more cards, and then they need to discard down to 5 as the maintenance to end this turn. And then it is back to my character's turn, and they will have previously discarded down to 5. So they've got their hand of 5, and they're going to try to decide what to do next. I'll just take you through one more part of a turn until we get to some combat. So the cards that I'm discarding right now is this is a spell focus. It's giving an additional magic. This is great, but I'm starting out with no magic, so it's unlikely I'm going to be using magic in combat anyway, at least initially, so I'm getting rid of that. And I'm also going to get rid of what's a great card because it only costs 1. This gives monsters +1 for the duration of the turn. The problem is that because I only have 2 actions right now, being a level 1 character, it's going to be very unlikely that I can actually ever use this unless I am doing combat without having moved or something, because this is going to cost me an action to play, and I only have 2 actions per turn. So unfortunately, this is coming in at a bad time. If this was later in the game when I had more actions per turn, I would definitely keep it, but I'm going to be getting rid of that now. So the first part of the phase, again, we're looking here at the cards that we could possibly use with peril points. We are currently at 5 peril points, so we have a lot of things that we can deploy, and in fact we could deploy any of these in our, The way combat works is you are taking the best value, or the way that I play as combat works, I should say, which is mostly following the rules of the game, maybe not 100%. You are taking the best value of whether you're using an attack of magic or just regular might. I call it might and magic. We're disregarding this for now. And you are going to be adding that value to a d6. So for example, if I chose to deploy and fight with this poltergeist, I would have an attack value of 3 plus whatever I rolled on the d6 plus my own value for might, which is 1. So I get basically a d6 plus a 4, and that goes against my opponent, who's also rolling a d6, and they are getting their own modifier of 1, but that's all they're getting. So that is a pretty big differential, and you can see that the poltergeist might of 3 that we are paying for to have this guy under our power would be pretty effective. The other we have this iron golem. He's got a might of 2, and this ghoul is an undead, has a might of 3. There are some other effects. So for example, the ghoul says that in addition to the wound, my opponent must discard one of their boon cards, or yeah, I think right, that's called the boon card, if they get a wound. Well, I know that they don't have any out yet, so it wouldn't be worthwhile to get this fellow out yet because I'm not going to get this bonus. And here we get to add another level to the card attack based on what the opponent's level is. And again, here we have discard a ready treasure. They don't have a ready treasure, so maybe it makes sense to go against this, although it's giving a benefit to them. I don't know. I think I'm going to go with this ghoul. Even though they don't have a readied boon, I think there is an instant trap here. You know, all of these cards, the benefit, I don't quite get them, but I do want to put one out because I want to show you how it works. So I'm going to go with this ghoul. And the ghoul is going to be deployed under my power, and it's going to go into the flooded chamber where my opponent is. So to signal this, what I do is I put my green token on there. It costs me 4 peril to deploy, so I'm down to 1. And there is no card right now that my opponent has that can prevent this attack. Let me just confirm that by looking at their hand of cards. I don't think there's anything that they have that would help them at this point. No, it's pretty early in the game, so we can see how the combat works. Again, we're adding up the ghoul strength, which is 3, my own strength, because this ghoul is acting under my power, which is 1, so I'm getting a 4 to my d6 that I'm rolling, and my opponent is simply getting the 1 to theirs because they have no other cards out that give them any benefits or anything like that. So we roll our d6s, we add what we get, and well, we got a 5 and 5, so obviously that is a successful attack on my opponent. They're going to be going to take a wound. Now, per the rules that I play, they have the opportunity to fight back the ghoul, and that is basically another roll. This is not exactly the rules that are written. The rules as written do allow for a fight back, but only if you retain a movement point, and I just found that too difficult to keep track of and also not completely thematic. So there can be one more roll now. This is my opponent attempting to get some good luck and overcome the deficit that they have, but the modifiers remain the same. So you can see they didn't roll, they would have had to roll much higher than me to inflict a wound on this ghoul. So the ghoul remains in this room, sort of floating around. That is the end of combat. My opponent now is down to 4 health, and that is my Dungeoneer portion of my turn. While I did use a card and while I did use some of my peril points, I still do have 2 actions to go because I have not gone anywhere. I have not quested, and I have not deployed a card into my hand. So I do, well, I only have 1 glory left. I actually can't afford any of my cards right now. And so that leaves me with the choice of exploring, which I think I'll do as an action. So to explore, you simply draw in a Dungeoneer card and take a look at it. This is Fiend's Hollow. And it's not a great place to go because I have to discard a card from either my hand or inventory. Inventory is essentially the tableau that you play to, but it does give me 4 peril and 3 glory, so I think I want to place that near me. Now you can place the cards anywhere you want, and that is part of the strategy of the game in terms of perhaps placing dangerous cards around your opponent or beneficial cards around you. This is a dangerous card because I would have to discard to go in there, but I like the possibility of gaining some peril and glory. So I'm going to hang on to this card right here near me, and that was my first action of the turn. And I could, as a second action, actually move into there. I think I'm going to do that because I'm happy to get rid of this gelatinous blob, I think, or one of these 2 fellows. So I'm going to move into here for my second action of the turn. I'm going to gain my 4 peril and 3 glory, and I'm going to end up discarding down one of my cards. Playing solo this way, in effect, becomes you playing against an AI that you need to manage, but because the rules are pretty simple, it doesn't get to be that complicated. You are playing, in effect, a game of hand management as much as possible, trying to deploy the most effective cards you can, and managing that against the risk and peril of going into new rooms, all the while trying to be the first to complete your quests and level up. Cycling through the cards as I do with these 2 sets allows you to see a lot of cards and adds to the choices that you have, which for me as a player makes it really interesting. If you're only playing with one of the sets, I don't recommend that cycling through, as you'll probably run out of cards. So that's a taste of how I played Dungeoneer solo, and thanks for watching.